From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Do you ever wonder what the guests and I talk about once the mic is turned off? Sometimes there are questions that I want to pose that are just a little bit off topic or just don't fit within our time framework. This is episode 436, and I'm excited to share this behind-the-scenes audio footage. This is a bonus episode that contains bits of conversations that are candid and, until this moment, confidential. It's a summer sampler that I've put together as the season winds down, courtesy of the Weston A. Price Foundation, the nonprofit behind this podcast. Find out more about the Weston A. Price Foundation at westonaprice.org. And that's it. This bonus episode has no ads. It'll just be samplers from 5 guests from earlier this year and our candid conversations off mic. You'll hear from Carrie Bennett, Kristen Files, Kavanaugh, Dr. Tom Cowan, and Daniel Griffith. At the top of each segment, I'll just let you know who the guest is, what they focus on, and where you can find the full episode. Enjoy! This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. First up is Carrie Bennett from the Quantum Body Collective. I first interviewed Carrie on episode 431 called Still Sick? The Sun Can Help. In this little mini-sode, Carrie gets specific about how modern living depletes our electron-rich bodies and what we can do about it. I've heard you say that one of the things humans are missing now is getting sufficient electrons, that we have this huge electron loss thing going on because we're only getting electrons from food. Can you tell us more about that?
The way that I learned that we derive energy is to take a food, break food down into electrons, and then those electrons go into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria make ATP. But that's not the only way that we use electrons in the body. And we actually, if you look at electron flow in the body, you recognize that we are basically meant to have what I call a net negative charge inside of our cells. Our cells are meant to be electron rich. And as that gets depleted, cells lose function. It's like a cell phone battery or a cell phone battery drains to a certain point, and the cell phone says, okay, now your screen can only be this bright. No, we can't download that update. No. So functionality decreases. And so cells need this net negative charge. And that means we got to be full of electrons. So how do we get these electrons? Well, sure, we can get them from food, but we also get them from earthing and grounding, which is the way that we would touch bare skin to the earth to flow electrons through our body. And that happens through our connective tissue network and the water that surrounds it. We can also build exclusion zone water, which is a negatively charged water that lives inside and around all of our cells. And so if we can build exclusion zone water, we can maintain that beautiful negative charge as well. And that is really really potent way to do that is with infrared exposures. Can be really charging for that exclusion zone water. And then come in contact with things, just being in nature, because being in nature is less depleting of our electron reserves than being in a modern indoor environment.
Yeah, you used the word depleting. I feel like at every turn, I'm running into people who are exhausted, anxious, depressed, almost lifeless, zombie-like, I would say. And it could be that the key is that they are having this electron loss, right?
Absolutely. Because think about it, if the body doesn't think it has enough energetic capacity, it's going to start shutting down different functions. It especially shuts down functions where the mitochondria are most dense. That's the brain. That's in the ovaries, right? That's in the egg. So we're seeing a rise in infertility. Okay, no, Carrie does not have the electron status or the mitochondrial health to have a baby. So we start to shut down reproductive capabilities. We start to get brain challenges. So cognition changes, that brain fog gets laid on so thick. And a lot of it just has to do with reestablishing healthy electron status in the body.
So you said get in nature. You said touch the ground. We talked about sunlight in the main episode. What about this kind of fad of cold plunging? Does that help in any way?
It absolutely does, because cold plunging actually makes us more efficient flowers of electrons. But also cold plunging, believe it or not, helps our mitochondria do something called produce more infrared light. So people don't realize mitochondria make their own infrared. they run about 10 degrees Celsius warmer than the rest of the cell. And when we cold plunge, they make even more infrared, that heat, that light for us, which we can then use to structure our water into exclusion zone water, which charges up that battery. It actually helps with electron flow through the mitochondria themselves. So cold can be a really supportive way to benefit all of these different processes.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Because some people just think it's a fad. Yeah. But I think what we have to do is counterbalance this electron depletion status that we have. So maybe we do have to get a little bit radical, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're not living in a world that really the human body was designed to live in. So we have to potentially go to different lengths to support the body, depending on how much we live indoors, surrounded by artificial light, non-native EMFs. We might have to remediate that. And cold plunging is a great way to do that. It doesn't have to be at the extreme that we see a lot, right? The fad that we see, 30 minutes a day for 30 days at 30 degrees or whatever, right? It doesn't have to be that extreme. But I do find a good 5-minute cold plunge sprinkled in 3 or 4 times throughout the week can be really beneficial.
What do you think about women's tolerance for cold versus men's? Do you see a difference in terms of how long they should be in the cold?
I think women's tolerance is much less, especially if it's a woman who's trying to conceive or looking to optimize fertility, because excessive cold can definitely be a stressor. So typically, if someone's trying to conceive, because women are a little more reactive to the cold that way, I'd say that if you're trying to conceive after ovulation and put on the brakes, right? But you can really do some good mitochondrial optimization leading up to that point.
Yeah, I invited a friend of mine to join me on a cold plunge retreat in Wisconsin. We were jumping in ice holes, all the things. And she's like, I want to have babies. I'm not coming. I think because she realized it could be too much of a stressor and she wanted to lower the stress in her life. So well thought out, right?
Yeah, well, I think part of the stress of cold plunging is a mental barrier, and that those of us who have done cold plunging maybe more as a regular practice recognize the way we feel afterwards. It's like, yes, that getting over that slight mental barrier of, oh gosh, am I really going to get my body into this cold water with, oh, but I know I'm going to feel amazing in about 90 seconds.
So the cold, the heat, nature, I think these are things that our ancestors would naturally have experienced. They spent 7/8 of their day outside and 1/8 maybe when they were sleeping in the cave. And we do it the other way around, right? So it's really important for us to find ways, like you said, to get in an environment that challenges us, but also that is healing.
Absolutely. Ancestral health does talk about what we eat, but also how we experience our environment. And these days we do have to get back into nature, back into our natural setting.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that reminder, Carrie. I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thanks, Hilda. Me too.
Next up is Kristen Files from Forest Creek Wellness. I first spoke to Kristen on episode 427, Address Adrenal Fatigue. And in this mini-sode, she dives into muscle testing, more specifically how you can use muscle testing to find any weak spots in your body and discover what the body responds well to remedy the weaknesses. I love these because we get to do a deeper dive on part of the subject, but something that could be a little tangential. And in this case, I want to talk about muscle testing because you mentioned using that as a tool as a practitioner to help people discern what their body needs or what their body responds poorly to. Can you tell us a little bit about the practice of muscle testing?
Yeah, so there's several different modalities for muscle testing, and I've kind of combined several different things. But basically, muscle testing is a test of communication. So whenever a practitioner is muscle testing, they will very lightly or gently challenge a certain muscle and see if you can meet that challenge, which means to meet and match their pressure, or whether they can overpower you. And so we know basic anatomy and physiology, like your muscle moves because your brain tells it to do so. What is not as commonly known is that every innervation from the brain to the muscle happens through a particular organ. So if I were to challenge your quadricep muscle, so to speak, then and you couldn't meet that challenge or that pressure, then I know that I need to address your small intestine. And I can address the small intestine with several different ways. I can have you put your hand on the small intestine and that will strengthen you. And it's really cool to see like you can be strengthened immediately and all you did is put your hand on the organ. But it doesn't really make sense to walk around rubbing your belly all day. That's not a solution. So then you can put the supplement that your body responds well to. And so that helps you to be very specific to that person because not everybody responds to the same supplement. It's very different for different people. And some people are tricky and I have to dig around for a while and think about it. And that's always fun.
And you're not saying that tongue in cheek. You really do like the research.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. And then you can put there's some practitioners will have vials of certain pathogens. So I will keep in my office, a certain viral, bacteria, fungal virals in there. And so that can be sort of diagnostic. I personally, being a nutritionist, I can't tell you that. So I could say, hey, we need to really support your microbial balance or something. I couldn't say you're dealing with X bacteria and here's how we take care of it. But it helps us to really get targeted towards what you are dealing with. So again, in context of the small intestine, there's so many issues that it could be. It could be leaky gut issue. It could just be an absorption issue. It could be we need to just nourish the small intestine. It could be a pathogenic issue. And so it helps you to get really granular on that. But then also you can do what's called 2-pointing. And so you could say, okay, is this issue localized to the small intestine or is it somewhere else that's influencing the small intestine? So you could try like we talked about in the podcast, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the vagal nerve, the thyroid, all those influence your small intestine function. And so I'm not just going straight to this downstream point. I'm able to address a northern point.
So this is a little bit like the conversation I had with Dr. Bradley Nelson on the emotion code, in that he was saying your body can tell you if you ask it. And so through this method of testing, the body reveals a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not actually very well versed in emotion code. I use something similar but different. So I need to dig deeper into that. But yes, I will say, okay, is this a nutritional issue or is it a structural issue? In which case I would do some tapping or maybe some acupuncture points, pressure points, or laser therapy or something like that. Or is this an emotional issue? And in which case you would do an emotional release. Yeah. And it's accurate every time. So my kids will laugh at me and I'll come home and I'll say, so I made, 2 people cry today. They're like, you're so mean, but, I won't even know what's going on with somebody. And I'll say, I feel like you're dealing with maybe some guilt or shame, right? And that's the emotion comes up. And it's kind of a little bit stressful for me to get into that because 1, it's personal, and 2, that's not my primary area of expertise. So I'm nutrition, but I just acknowledge what comes up for the body. So we joke around, we call it nutritional therapy because it's like nutrition and therapy in one. But anyway, for this particular client I have in mind, guilt and shame came up, and it turns out she was going through a really nasty divorce and she felt really guilty about that, even though she shouldn't have. But because she felt that, she was holding it and it was causing her to be in dysfunction. And so a supplement's not going to help that, and diet's not going to help that, or maybe it'll get you 50%, but you're still struggling with it.
So if someone's listening and they're like, oh, this sounds really interesting, I'd like to do some muscle testing to discern some of the stuff that's going on with me emotionally or physically, what kind of practitioner should they seek out?
So this is kind of a loaded question. It's really important. But as muscle testing is becoming more popular, you see a lot of people taking just a weekend course and then just jumping in there, and they don't really have a good clinical skills, or, they don't take the whole person, because I don't just do the muscle testing. I take it in the context of other tests and things like that. So I would say definitely looking for someone experienced. I was taking a continuing ed course, for example, and there was a girl in there and she's supposed to be muscle testing for the pancreas, but she didn't know where a pancreas was. But she went to go work on all her clients that Monday. So that's very alarming to me. So I say, look for someone who's experienced, someone who has had training, and not just a weekend course, but extensive training. And then I personally the modalities I are ART, which is autonomic response testing, which is Dr. Klinghardt. I use a little bit of KST, which is core and specific technique. I'm currently training with my chiropractor to do AMIT, which is advanced muscle integration technique, which isn't really geared towards nutrition yet, but I'm hoping to kind of develop something with that. So those are all good starting points, but really just making sure that someone has the certifications and the skills and the experience when they're muscle testing you.
Well, thanks for taking this extra time.
No problem. It was fun.
Kate Kavanaugh is next from episode 434, From Vegetarian to Butcher. On this minisode, Kate shares why it is so important to cook and eat at home instead of eating out at restaurants. Thank you for coming back, even though it was just a minute ago. That always makes me laugh. We literally didn't go anywhere. But anyway, okay. So one thing we did not touch on in the main interview is cooking and how I think I've heard you say it lies at the heart of many of our issues right now. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I've really been thinking about how that we have stopped cooking as much at home. And to return to it would really influence 3 spaces that I think desperately need us to cook at home. And those 3 spaces are human health. And I think that your listeners are very familiar with all the ways in which human health is declining. And when we eat out, I think we are taking in a lot of ingredients that are hidden, a lot of sugars, a lot of seed oils that we might not know is in that food. And I think that's one thing that we can do. Or we're eating processed food, right? We're eating convenience foods in lieu of cooking that are going to be hyper palatable, hyper processed, full of these ingredients that we might not want in our bodies. And then I think it lies at the heart of regenerative farmers and ranchers farmers and ranchers across the United States are struggling. And this is something that I think is really important to talk about. They operate on average on 1.5% margins. This is not okay.
You mean they're making very little for all the work they're putting in?
An average of 1.5% margins, which means that many farms and ranches are in the red. They are not making any money, and they are growing the most important part of our food system. And I really believe that if we return to cooking at home and building these relationships with the people that raise our food, that raise our meat, that raise our vegetables, that we can begin to build a more financially sustainable system. And I think that's really important, as well as the reciprocity in regenerative agriculture, building soil organic matter. And so it has both ramifications for the financial health of farmers and the health of soil and our land. And then that third piece is I think that we have become really deeply disconnected with one another. I think at multiple different scales, at the scale of the individual family unit, where having a meal at the dinner table can really bring us together, at the scale of our communities, where when we host a little get together potluck in our backyard where we're cooking for one another, we're connecting back into our communities. And I think that connection with one another is as much of a nutrient as anything that we're going to find in our food. And so I really believe that cooking lies at the heart of this little triangle that we're experiencing some fractures in.
Wow. Yeah. So you're saying that if we literally rolled up our sleeves and made more meals from scratch, we would see the benefit in our own health.
Yes.
We would be helping to revitalize the soil and farmers and ranchers' livelihood. Yes. And we would revitalize our community too.
Yes. That's my thought.
Wow. Wow. That's really, really interesting. And just it's a novel way to look at it. That's why I'm processing it out loud. If you were going to recommend to someone who eats out all the time, for example, I have friends in New York City who literally don't even have a kitchen because they're assuming New Yorkers are not going to cook from home or from scratch. Like, what would be a simple meal to start with? What might be on your table one Thursday night, for example?
Yeah. So oftentimes on my table, whether it's for breakfast or dinner, is some ground beef or ground meat of some sort that has just been sauteed with some herbs, maybe a little bit of carrots or celery or a vegetable from my garden. And that's it. And I actually think that one of the biggest hurdles in cooking is that we've been sold this idea that cooking needs to be fussy or fancy by chefs and by restaurants. And I think if we can get back to this idea that it doesn't have to be precious, it can just be simple and nourishing, that is really helpful for those of us that need some convenience in our food. And I count myself amongst them, right? I run a podcast and a farm and a business. And so I need meals to be quick and easy and not take too much time. And you can literally just saute up some ground beef with a little bit of salt and call that good. And if you want to add some flourish and some herbs or some vegetables, great. But we can kind of let go of this idea of these more put together meals.
Yeah, that lowers the bar and it's still super nourishing. I love that my friend Hilary Boynton always says, simplicity is gourmet.
I love that. That's beautiful.
It is. But I think one thing that came to mind when you were saying what has influenced us to think we have to get fancy, I think it's all the cooking TV shows too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's celebrity chef culture. I think it's when you open up a cookbook from Thomas Keller and he's telling you to blanch celery before you add it to your chicken soup. Well, this is ridiculous. This is not made for people that lead busy lives and that want cooking to feel simple and accessible.
Well, I feel like you've helped us remember that truth. So thank you so much for joining me for this little mini-sode, and we really appreciate you, Kate.
Absolutely. I appreciate you so much, Hilda.
Next is Dr. Tom Cowan from episode 429, Myth-Busting Modern Biology. On this mini-sode, Tom talks about hard truths and how they help us grow and come home to ourselves. Listen, I wanted to ask you, you ended our interview on the note about how the truth is never scary, though it may be hard. In the end, it will bring us home. Can you tell us the story of one bit of truth that was maybe hard for you at first and maybe even scary, but then you realized, okay, this is good and solid?
I mean, we've all sort of had that with relationships, right? You realize at some point, and many of us have been through divorces and breaking off of relationships, and it feels hard and scary. And what am I going to do? And at a certain point, you check in and realize what the truth is. And as was the case with me, you realize that what comes next is a whole lot better and you find your true home in life. And as long as you stay with the house of cards and the illusion, it's a bit like, I think, one of the best analogies ever created. We're living in a situation like the Peanuts comic book, Charlie Brown and Lucy. And the best part of that story was, as everybody remembers, Lucy had a football and Charlie wanted nothing more in life but to kick that football just once. And so every time Lucy would say, Charlie, this time you can kick the football. Charlie would say, are you sure? The last 10 times you took the football away and I fell right in my butt. No, this time you're going to kick the football. So Charlie, in all his earnestness, comes running up and Lucy pulls it away and he falls right in his butt and doesn't kick the football. Mm-hmm. So that's vote for me. I will set you free. Eat this drug. Take ivermectin. That's going to keep you from getting COVID. Watch this guy. Participate in this. All this stuff. Just if we just get a better currency situation in the U.S. Don't look at, they just made up the currency. Don't look at that. It's just, this time, Tom, you're going to kick that football. Okay, I'm going to do it. So you run up and whoop, they pull it right away. Once you learn that lesson, that it's your football and nobody's holding it for you. And then you start to develop trust in yourself. And then you start finding people who actually will help you learn how to kick the football.
Stop outsourcing your health and your autonomy, really, even to health freedom groups. Wow. All right. Well, the sound is getting fuzzy now. So thank you so much, Tom, for this extra time, and look forward to seeing you at some gathering, maybe even this summer. Take care, my friend. Batting cleanup is Daniel Griffith. I first spoke with him on episode 430, Why Regenerative Agriculture is Not Enough. On this minisode, he tells the rest of his own story, how he healed from his serious health crisis, and what radical changes he made to his diet to get there. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. It was such a wonderful conversation. I feel blessed too. You really gave me some food for thought. But one thing that left me hanging was wondering, were the chickens enough to help you rebuild your health? Take us back to that time when you were reading Folks This Ain't Normal on the back porch.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. 100 chickens did not save my life. I think great change starts with clarity. And most of the time, clarity is a very simple shift. One of my favorite authors, John Ralston Saul, has this quote, "Blessed is they whose clarity causes disquietude." It's a beautiful quote, but in this case, this little moment of clarity caused not disquietude, but great amounts of health. I mentioned in the full episode that, when we started raising our own foods, we started caring about local foods and caring about local farmers who, raise those local foods, and we started farming. And that was a huge moment. But there's a huge aspect of the story that I'm skipping over. I was a mathematics and computer science major in college, and so that's the way my mind works. And I started to associate the foods in which I ate to the feelings in which I had. And, I'd go through periods, like I said in the episode, where I would lose 80 pounds in a singular month. And then we would work for the next 2 months to gain the weight back because if it happened again, 80 pounds off of 80, I would waste away. And that's when I read Price's Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, became a member of West Today Price. That's not a plug. That actually, I cannot tell you. And I have long been a huge fan. I'll just say it this way. But we started to understand not just about local food and local farms, but the actual reality of those foods mattered, right? Like a piece of broccoli, nutrient dense or not, raw or not, processed or not, is not broccoli for everyone. That we have this epigenetic reality of heritage. We have the chemicals that we're exposed to in our early youth and our late adult. Like, there's many more facets, a lot more complexity to food than just broccoli is good, Cheetos are bad. And so my wife and I, we did for 2 years straight. Again, this is mathematically oriented, but I would journal. I have many journals, and I still have them. How I felt physically, emotionally, and spiritually before a meal, during a meal, and after a meal, as open and as outrageous and as, if I can say, naked as possible. Just outrageous, just get all these thoughts down physically, emotionally, and spiritually, around that meal. And then I would document the ingredients and the location in which those ingredients within that meal were grown. So like it's ketchup, maybe it was a local apple cider vinegar with local tomato ketchup, or maybe it was an industrially produced, like whatever it was. And then after 2 years of doing this, obviously along the way we were learning, but then I built this actual computer program that associated every physical, spiritual, and emotional, positive, neutral, negative feeling. They were all ranked with all of these foods and where they were produced and everything else. And then it spit out a 21 ingredient food list, which also included where I could obtain those foods. Like, for instance, maybe I was bad on tomatoes, but good on tomatoes that I grew, something like this. Or maybe it was Roma tomatoes instead of cherry tomatoes. And the Roma tomatoes were good if I grew them, but the cherry tomatoes could be fine as long as they were organic and non-GMO from the supermarket. A lot of complexity there. And then I immediately changed my diet to those 21 items. And about the last maybe 8.5 years, 9 years, we've been on that diet. Progressively, we add new ingredients every month, so like most recently we added back in horseradish and nothing negative has happened, and sometimes it does. And I'm down for a month and I have very little energy or I lose a bunch of weight or something like this. But there's a whole other side to the story of like hyper intensity of the data.
Wow. And you were talking earlier about how multifaceted the whole food web is. And of course, how multifaceted your condition was. But I couldn't help but wonder, Daniel, some people say that we don't have genetic conditions necessarily. And I'm not trying to point to your parents, but more to the environment in which you were raised. Like, I wonder if that was what led to the various bone issues you had with the ball and joint sockets and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole Masters is one of the soil scientists in the regenerative ag space. Brilliant, and wonderful woman. She has her story, which is based in paraquat, right?
Yes.
Just being exposed to paraquat, the herbicide, the modern herbicide all around her. I have no doubt that although my parents really tried and they did their best, and my goodness, like my childhood versus many of the childhoods of my peers is unprecedented, both in spirituality and energy and emotions and physicality and nutrition and food and everything else. But yes, no, absolutely. Epigenetically, from my heritage, mixed with chemicals in the landscape.
All the things.
I mean, it goes back to why we can't be regenerative unless we're working to all be regenerative. It's fence line photos. We need to deconstruct that model. Because if you think I'm growing chemical-free regenerative beef on my land where my neighbor is spraying pesticides from a helicopter, right? Like this is a laughable matter. It's a complete joke. Right. It's just like my health, right? My parents could have led me down a perfect pathway, but glyphosate could have still been in the landscape. Paraquat could have still been in the landscape. There's a lot of external stressors. We have a community problem. Regenerating the soil is very easy. Done it on all over the world, right? But regenerating the human community around that soil is much harder.
Yeah. But I love your simple charge to the listener and to me, to start where we're at, to also even the methodical way in which you approached your health. But you weren't just all in your rational mind because you were exploring your emotions, the spirits, all the things that make up who you are and how you were interacting with the food. I find that's fascinating. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who has been so methodical and yet also thinking with the right side of their brain too, approaching their well-being. It's really cool.
I appreciate that. But I also think rationality isn't alien to Mother Earth. I think that's a very important concept. I think a lot of the times when we modern humans, we think rationally, we believe we're thinking reductionistly, right? We're thinking overly scientific, and we see the science and we see scientists today, especially modern scientists today, and we say, oh, that's bad. I don't want to be a part of that group. But Mother Earth, I think it's ridiculous to think that she only is a poet or a philosopher or a lover or a complex, or like, there's a lot of life to be had. And in that life, the grand complexity of all comes together for the, elevation of all, for the health of all. And so I think there's absolutely a place for mathematics. I think science has an amazing role to play, just as much as like go out, sit here at the pasture right in front of my house and just breathe for 2 hours, right? That's also unbelievably important. And breath works and meditation and energy and like it all has to matter. Else, in my opinion, none of it does. It all has to connect, else what's totally tangential.
Wow. Well, speaking of connecting, I can't wait to see you. I'll come out to your Tim Shell Wildland and hang out sometime. And I'm really grateful for your time today. Appreciate it, Daniel.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hilda. It's been a pleasure.
Our guests today were Carrie Bennett from carriebwellness.com, Kristen Files from forestcreekwellness.com, Kate Kavanaugh from groundworkcollective.com, Dr. Tom Cowan from drtomcowan.com, and Daniel Griffith from danielfirthgriffith.com. And I'm Hilda Labrador, the host and producer of the podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Paul M. Schmidt kept it short and sweet. He just said love, and he gave us 5 stars. He said, I love this podcast and all the people involved. Paul, thank you so much. That is so encouraging. You too can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Just go to the site, click on ratings and reviews, give us as many stars as you like, and tell the world what you think of the show. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.